All right, ready for a deep dive into something pretty fascinating. Today we're tackling Gen Z consumerism. Not just what they're buying, but the why and the so what for all of us.
And it's a whole new world out there. This isn't your typical marketing playbook anymore.
That's why we're digging into this Gen Z Consumer Preferences and Market Trends report, the 2024 update. They're really trying to predict what's next, even looking ahead to 2025.
It's about understanding why they make the choices they do. Once you get that, you're not scrambling to keep up, you're ahead of the game.
Love it. So who are we talking about? Digital natives is what this report calls them, and not just because they're good with an iPad before they can tie their shoes.
It's bigger than that. Growing up with the internet as a given, that constant connection, it changes how they see the world, their role in it. Totally different than previous generations.
Which impacts how they find products, what makes them open their wallets, everything, really.
Exactly. It's not just seeing an ad and buying anymore. Values come into play, authenticity, connecting with a brand on a different level. Look at the whole ethical consumerism movement, for instance.
Big focus in the report, 73% willing to spend more if it's sustainable. You can't ignore that.
Exactly. This is a fundamental shift. They're holding brands, accountable environment, social impact, the whole 9 yards. They want transparency, the real deal, not just some greenwashing campaign.
And they can spot a fake a mile away. This is the generation that grew up online. They've seen it all.
Precisely. They want brands reflecting their values, walking the walk, not just talking.
Okay, so ethics matter to Gen Z, but how does that play out when they actually shop? They're digital natives, so online's got to be huge, right?
Absolutely. 67% prefer shopping online and not just browsing. Decisions are influenced by what they see online, even when they're in a physical store.
It's like having a research team in their back pocket. Speaking of which, the report had this wild stat, 10% year-over-year jump in mobile commerce. That's got to be significant.
It is. Mobile optimization isn't a nice to have. It's essential now. And not just a website that works on a phone. Gen Z expects a seamless, engaging, mobile-first experience.
So more than just slapping a mobile-friendly label on your website then, what does Gen Z optimized actually look like these days?
Think about how they consume information. Scrolling, fast-paced. Your site needs to be visually strong, easy to use, and load incredibly fast.
Makes sense. Short attention spans. Efficiency is key for them.
Yeah.
But what about those brands that are really about the in-person experience? How do they bridge that?
Now, that's interesting. This report had a great example, the brand Everlane.
Oh, yeah, they're all about transparency, right? Prices, where their stuff's made, really laying it all out there.
And that's smart. It tackles a major Gen Z concern, authenticity. Being that open about their costs, production, it builds trust with a generation that's naturally skeptical of marketing.
So it's not just buying a product, it's buying into their whole philosophy, knowing where it came from, who made it, what it actually cost. That's a big deal, especially for a generation that cares about social responsibility.
Absolutely. And it goes beyond just ethical sourcing. Everlane is also very transparent with their marketing itself.
Now that's interesting. What do you mean?
They lean heavily into user-generated content. Real people wearing their clothes, sharing their actual experiences.
It's creating a community, that feeling of we're all in this together, supporting ethical practices and, looking good while doing it.
Exactly. A conversation, authenticity that Gen Z picks up on. They can sniff out a phony ad campaign a mile away, but real people vouching for a brand, that carries weight.
It's like social proofs, but amplified. Speaking of social, we can't talk about Gen Z without social media. How are brands using that to connect with this, let's face it, somewhat elusive generation?
It's not just throwing money at influencers anymore, though that still has its place. They want authenticity, real connections, brands that feel like a natural part of their online world,
So less polished corporate stuff and more genuine interaction, actually being part of the conversation, responding to comments, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Content that resonates, starts discussions, makes them feel heard.
This is really interesting. So we've got ethical consumerism, digital fluency, authentic connection. But this report goes further. They're making predictions about what's next for this powerful group.
And trust me, things are about to get even more interesting.
All right, so where does this all go? What's the future look like for Gen Z consumers?
Well, if 2024 is anything to go by, sustainability is only going to get bigger.
Right, it's not a fad for them, it's just how they see the world.
Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting. Personalization is going to be massive. The whole one-size-fits-all approach, dead in the water.
Makes sense. So much choice at their fingertips. Why settle?
Exactly. They want to feel unique, and they'll pay for that. Curated shopping, Really personalized suggestions, products that feel like them.
How can brands even keep UP with that? Sounds like a logistical nightmare.
It's a challenge, no doubt, but also a huge opportunity. The brands that figure out data that create those smooth, personalized experiences, they'll be the winners.
The report actually talked about data quite a bit. They even called out social commerce as a potential game changer.
Ah, yes, social commerce. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Imagine you're scrolling through your favorite app, see something you like, bam, you buy it. Right there, no switching apps, nothing.
Whoa, that's next level convenience.
Yeah.
So we're not just talking influencers anymore. This is like a whole different way of buying stuff online.
Exactly. Meet the customer where they are, make it effortless. And for a generation basically living on social media, huge.
So just having a social media presence isn't enough anymore. It's going to be this whole integrated thing, content, community, and actually being able to buy stuff all in one place.
You got it. That's where user-generated content comes in, influencer marketing, shoppable posts. It all builds that really immersive experience.
The report did give some pretty practical tips for businesses trying to navigate all this. Anything stand out to you?
Building genuine relationships is key. Can't just throw money at ads. You got to engage on their terms. Be transparent. Build that community feel around your brand.
Which ties into everything we've been saying. It's like they're demanding more from businesses. Not just a transaction, but a connection.
Absolutely. They want it to mean something. Purpose, shared values, brands that inspire them. And that's something we should all be thinking about no matter what generation we're from.
It's like they're leading the charge for a completely new way of thinking about business, making it more thoughtful, more impactful.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just the environment or ethical sourcing. It's that desire for authenticity, for real connection that I think a lot of people crave.
We've covered a lot. Ethics, digital fluency, personalization, this whole social commerce thing.
Yeah.
But what really strikes me is how much Gen Z's values are changing the game for everyone.
It's true. They're not just consumers, they're changing the rules. And that influence is only going to get stronger.
Okay, so we've established Gen Z as a force to be reckoned with,
Yeah.
but what does it all mean for everyone else?
That's the million-dollar question, right? The reality is they're setting the stage for how we'll all be consuming in the future, their values, expectations, how comfortable they are in the digital world. That's not going away.
So it's not just about understanding them, it's about understanding where the whole market is heading, which is relevant for all of us. No matter what our job is or how old we are, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
It really has. And I think the biggest takeaway is we have to approach all this with open minds, be willing to learn, to adjust, to really try to create a better future for everyone.
Couldn't have put it better myself. Now, I know that was a lot of info to digest. Before we wrap up, let's distill this into some key takeaways for our listeners. Okay, so we've covered a ton about Gen Z, their habits, their values. But if someone's listening, saying, what's the one thing I should remember from all this? What would it be?
Pay attention to how fast things are changing. The report really stressed that. What works today might be old news tomorrow, trends are moving that fast, and Gen Z, they're at the forefront. Watching how they behave, it's like a preview of where we're all headed.
You're right. It's not just knowing the trends, it's knowing how fast they change. So how do we do that? How do we stay ahead of the curve without getting completely overwhelmed?
Stay curious. That's key. Experiment, try new stuff, don't be afraid to make mistakes and be open about it. Gen Z actually respects brands that own up to messing up. You know, it's the ones stuck in the old ways that are going to struggle.
So it's more than just keeping up with Gen Z specifically. It's learning from how they approach things, that adaptability, the experimentation, the openness to new ideas. It's seeing those things as positive, not disruptive.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole conversation so interesting. It's not just about this one generation. It's about forces that are literally changing the world.
Absolutely. It's like they're not just participating in the market, they're reshaping it.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're making the rest of us rethink some things along the way.
Yeah.
Which I think is a good thing. This has been a great deep dive. I really appreciate your insights.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
And for everyone listening, thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep those brains engaged and keep on exploring.